This has been an awesome series, this Do Family Better series, and if you hadn't had a chance to listen or to watch the messages, go back and check those out from Pastor Michael, from Chessa and Laron. Very impactful for me personally. And so I'm gonna start like this. You know, legend has it that the famous writer and novelist Ernest Hemingway made a bet with some writer friends of his over lunch, and he said, I bet you that I can write a compelling novel, a full narrative in 6 words. So his writer friends took him up on the bet, and he pulled out a napkin, and he wrote these 6 words down. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. And he won that bet, because that's a full story right there. Even you can kind of feel some haunting, a bit of a gut wrench in some of that story. And so those were his 6 words. Now, again, this is likely a legend and a myth, but somewhere down the line, this 6-word story, this compressed storyline became a popular thing. There's plenty of articles. In fact, I was reading a book called Not Quite What I Was Planning, 6-word memoirs. And it's a collection. It's 215 pages of submissions by people of their own, their autobiographical 6-word stories. And I want to list some of these for you. Some are funny, some will make you think, some are sad, and some I can't say here on Sunday morning, but here's a few of them. So, found on Craigslist, table, apartment, fiance. Who knew? Kind of a one-stop shop there, okay? The next one, lucky in love, unlucky in metabolism. I feel that one, I feel it. Oh, sweet nectar of life, coffee. Now, man, if that's how you're gonna sum up your entire life, you gotta really love coffee. So, okay, some to make us think here, not a good Christian, but trying, okay? Thought I would have more impact. Kind of start feeling something there. Cursed with cancer, blessed with friends. That was one person's submission. The car accident changed my life. Well, you can feel that one, can't you? Still make coffee for 2. Obviously there's a loss there, but someone's still getting up and making coffee for someone who's not there. Nobody knows how I've suffered. Well, you can feel that one. And then the name of the book, Not Quite What I Was Planning. And so I thought as we wrapped up this series, I may kind of take this angle, maybe a little unexpected angle today. What if our family, our life could be described by those 6 words? This is not quite what I thought when I set out, for family and really life in general. I didn't see a lot of this coming. This is not what I expected, not quite what I was planning. And listen, we're gonna end up in a great place of just hope, and I believe God's gonna speak to us. But let's start with this idea. What do we do? How do we live? How do we move on when life hadn't turned out fully like we planned? So we're gonna look at someone in the Old Testament, Jacob. And man, his life, his family life was just full of twists, turns, chaos, dysfunction. There's all kinds of stuff going on here. This sermon maybe should be called Do Family Better Than Jacob, because the guy, he had issues, and so did his family. So now, real quick, up front, the story of Jacob from birth till, he was a husband, a father. It really takes up 10 full chapters of Genesis, and there's no way we can't cover all of it. You could pull 100 sermons out of that. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna fly high over the story. We're gonna land in a couple of spots, pull some things out that I believe will help us, help all of us, not just those that are married or those that are parents. So don't click the stream off, don't check out. I believe God will use this to speak to all of us today. But we're gonna fly high, hit a couple of important things, and then kind of land the plane today. So let's go. Most of us know Isaac's grandfather, Abraham, kind of the father of the faith, patriarch of the faith. And then Abraham had 2 sons. One of those was Isaac. Isaac married a lady named Rebekah, and then God promised Rebekah she was gonna have 2 sons. And sure enough, she did. This is kind of the Spark Notes, Cliff Notes version. She had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, and that's where we pick up the story. So these boys, Jacob and Esau, grew up. Esau became an expert hunter and outdoorsman. Jacob was a quiet man, preferring life indoors among the tents. Isaac loved Esau because he loved his game, not his game, but kind of, he was a hunter. So he loved his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. One day, Jacob was cooking a stew. Esau comes in from the field, starved. Esau says to Jacob, give me some of that red stew, I'm starved. That's how he came to be named Edom, red, okay? Jacob said, make me a trade, my stew for your rights as the firstborn. By the way, that was a huge deal in this day. Esau said, I'm starving, what good is my birthright to me? Jacob said, first, swear to me, and he did it. On oath, Esau traded away his rights as firstborn. Jacob gave him bread and the stew of lentils. He ate, drank, got up and left, and that's how Esau shrugged off his rights as the firstborn. So already we can see some action here in the story. Jacob cons Esau out of his birthright, and then we get to a more well-known part of the story, and I'll just kind of run through it here. So Isaac is getting old, he's blind. He calls out to his son Esau the hunter and says, I may be nearing the end of my days. Go out, get your bow, and catch me some of that food, and catch me some of that game, and fix me some of that tasty stew that I like, so I can give you my blessing before I die. And someone was listening. Rebekah was eavesdropping. Mom was eavesdropping as Isaac spoke this to his son Esau. As soon as Esau had gone off to the country to hunt game for his father, Rebekah spoke to her other son Jacob. Hey, I just overheard your father talking with your brother Esau. He said, bring some game, fix me a hearty meal so that I can eat and bless you with God's blessing before I die. Now, my son, hey, listen to me. Do what I tell you. Go to the flock, get me 2 goats, pick the best. I'll prepare them into a hearty meal, the kind that your father loves. Then you'll take it to your father. He'll eat and bless you before he dies. Jacob says, but mother, hey, mom, Jacob says, my brother Esau is a hairy man and I have smooth skin. What happens if my father touches me? He'll think I'm playing games. I'll bring down a curse on myself instead of a blessing. If it comes to that, says mom, I'll take the curse on myself. Now just go do what I said. Go and get the goats, mom says. So Rebekah fixes the food. She gives Jacob some of Esau's clothes. He puts them on, puts some goat skins, weird, on his arms and neck. And he does just that. He goes in, he tricks his dad Isaac, and he gets this highly valued and prized blessing. And again, this is a big deal in this day. It's almost like this revelation, this prophetic word over what's going to happen in your life. And so Isaac speaks over him, an abundance of riches. All the nations will serve you. You will lord over your brother. It's not insignificant. And about that time, just as Jacob leaves, Esau comes in, realizes he's not only missed out on his birthright, now he's missed out on his blessing. And he's grief-stricken. And he just starts begging his dad, is there any blessing? Any blessing for me? Any blessing you can offer me? And all Isaac can offer is, you will dwell away from riches, live by your sword, serve your brother, and eventually throw his yoke off your neck. To which I'm sure Esau is thinking, if that's a blessing, who needs a curse? So Esau's ticked off. Rebekah jumps back in the story. Mom jumps back in, still making things happen. Heard about Esau's plans, so she sent for Jacob and told him, listen, Esau's consoling himself by plotting to kill you. He is royally ticked off. So listen carefully, my son. Get ready and flee to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with them until your brother cools off. When he calms down and forgets what you have done to him, unlikely, I will send for you to come back. Why should I lose both of you in one day? And by the way, after all of mom's meddling, she never gets to see her son again. Some primetime drama happening here. This is Dysfunction Junction happening in this family. Now, we don't have time to dig into all these. It would take way too much time, but I'm just gonna at least point out some of the obvious things going on in this family. First is favoritism. Isaac loves Esau, the hunter, the outdoorsman. Mom really loves Jacob, the quiet indoors man. There's a real lack of oneness in the parenting. They're not communicating, they're not working together, they're not leading together. Not only favoritism, there's deception. Not only are they not on the same page, they're actively working against each other. At least mom is. She's conniving and scheming, making plans with Jacob. This is like the clinical dysfunctional family. You know, dysfunctional families, they say they don't talk, they don't trust, and they don't feel. And a lot of that is going on all through here. But I want to camp out a little bit more on this third one. There seems to be a real lack of leadership and spiritual direction here. Really, I think specifically as it relates to Isaac, to dad. You know, Isaac is portrayed, and certainly was, just a great man of faith. The Bible speaks about his genuine love for his wife. He was a peacemaker and a patient man. But some authors have pointed out, and it's interesting to think about, that Isaac seems to be missing at some key points in this story. It's almost like he seems to be in the dark about a lot of this stuff going on. Maybe it's age, but maybe it's more than that. And, you know, where was Isaac when Esau trades away his birthright? Was he there, or just not paying attention, or was he out? You know, Rebekah, mom seems to be the one making all the deals, and Isaac seems to be the one maybe in his chair with the remote. Where is he? And so I would just say to us, because I'm a man, I'll talk to the men. Men, let's step up. Let's don't live our lives so we don't show up in our story. At least the chapters of our story that really matter, the family chapters. Listen, I get it. I'm a man. We're wired to provide. We want to produce. We want to prove our worth. And so we bring that A game to the office and the work site and the job site. But sometimes, more times than we would want to admit, what we bring home is leftovers. And we're not showing up in the chapters of our story that really matter. Hey, that's not condemnation. Listen, I've wrestled with this my whole life and still a work in progress. But I'm just saying, our families, our relationships need us to show up. Kids need parents to show up, to love them, to discipline them, to encourage them. Wives need husbands to show up, to love, to lead, to care for them. Husbands need their wives to show up, to support, to appreciate, to esteem them. We all need to be present in our stories. And so, listen, I know there's different seasons of life and things happen and we just have to kind of gut it up, but I don't want to not say this. If we have nothing left to give at home, we're likely giving too much in other places. So let's just let that sit right there. So let's continue on. We've seen a few of these things happening in Jacob's family. And by the way, the Bible's full of all this kind of just raw and real dysfunction and mess, just like your life, just like my life. So let's go ahead and get our first main takeaway on the board. It'll make us all feel better. Realize that all families are dysfunctional. Okay, there, I said it out loud. Somebody was clapping. Our families, we may not have the same stuff going on as what's happening here, but we're all in the same boat because we're all broken in some ways, and that brokenness leaks out on the people around us. And you know why, right? It's because of sin, which was brought to us by the original dysfunctional family, Adam and Eve. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, Adam, and death through sin, and in this way, death came to all people because all have sinned. So we've all sinned. And if we're followers of Christ, yes, we're saved. We've been given the gift of eternal life, but we're still working all this stuff out. We're not 100% functional all the time. So we've got some dysfunctional, we've got some brokenness we're working on. Now, this is not an excuse to live sloppy or stay in our mess or not move forward or not work on ourselves. But let's just acknowledge this is us. We're all dysfunctional. So let's continue on with the story. Rebecca tells Jacob, Esau's mad, you better get out of here. And she says, hey, and by the way, you need a wife anyways. And I don't like the women around here, so you need to go over to Laban's. She really does say that. I don't like the women here. You need to go over to my brother Laban's place and find a wife. On the way, Jacob has a dream. And this is where God confirms this covenant blessing that he's given to Abraham, to Isaac, and now he confirms it with Jacob. I'm going to bless you. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars, numerous as the dust on the earth. I just thought it was interesting that right in the middle of all this conniving and scheming and running, that God shows up to say, hey, I'm here, and I want to bless you, and I want to be a powerful part of your life. And so just a side note here, right in the middle of our running and scheming and conniving, I believe God's doing the same thing. Hey, I'm here, and I love you, and I've got a future for you. So just put that somewhere. So Jacob, he goes to weird Uncle Laban's house. The Bible doesn't say he's weird. I just like to think of him as weird Uncle Laban because we've all got a weird Uncle Laban in our family, right? We've all got that person. We're getting near to Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we're already thinking about the people we're going to have to interact with. We've all got the weird Uncle Laban, and if you can't think of them, it's you. You're the weird Uncle Laban. So you're welcome for that revelation today. So Jacob works out a deal with Laban because when he arrives, he meets Rachel. And he's just smitten. This is one of Laban's daughters, Rachel. He's just smitten by her. I've got to have her as my wife. So long story short, he works out a deal with Uncle Laban that he will work 7 years to get Rachel's hand in marriage. And then the deceiver gets deceived. Interesting how that happens. We don't know how all this happened, but instead of being delivered Rachel, it's dark. He wakes up the next morning and finds this is not Rachel he's now married to. It's Leah, the less desirable sister. And again, a lot happens here. You need to go back and read it, more dysfunction and drama. But he ends up agreeing to work another 7 years to get Leah's hand in marriage. Okay, by the way, time out just for a second. I realize this means he has 2 wives, and so I I don't like to just move past this because some of you are going to get stuck here, so I'm just going to address it. The rest of the sermon's not going to be about this. Justin can preach on that next week. But I want to say this. When you encounter things like multiple wives and maidservants and concubines, this stuff that's hard to reconcile, here's what helps me. I just put all this under the heading of not everything the Bible describes, the Bible prescribes, okay? So not everything the Bible describes, the Bible prescribes is saying, do this. And I'm definitely telling you, multiple wives is definitely something you shouldn't do. So I'm just gonna leave it there. Not everything the Bible talks about is something you should do. It's just delivering the real goods, all right? So a lot happens in this part of the story. Jacob, he has 2 wives, he's got family is growing, and then things get contentious and competitive with Laban. You'd have to go back and read it all. It just gets really chaotic. And so Jacob decides, I got to get out of here. This is more drama. The guy can't have a normal life, more drama. And then Laban tracks him down. They end up with a truce. All is good. But from this point on, Jacob decides, I've got to return to my homeland. And in the path to get home is a person he's got to deal with. And he comes to realize he's got to deal with the elephant in the room, the elephant in his life. He's got to attempt to reconcile with his brother Esau. And so let's just present the obvious here that God is behind and he is for reconciling broken relationships. If you're stuck in a family situation that wasn't what you planned and there are broken relationships involved, I'm just telling you, you need to make the first move to mend them. I know it's hard, but you need to take this step. Now, I'm not talking about abusive or unhealthy relationships, certainly not. But if there's a relationship that needs mending, that should be mending, you need to take that step and reconcile it. And it's gonna take humility, which none of us are fond of. Look, when Jacob actually does meet Esau, Jacob approached his brother, he bowed. And if you read more, he called him Lord like 7 times. He humbled himself, bowed to the ground 7 times before him. Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and threw his arms around his neck. So let me ask you, I know this is hard. Who wants to talk about reconciliation? But do you care more about reconciliation than being right? Do you care more about righteousness or rightness? Are you wanting to be right or married? You better just decide that. Are you wanting to be right or married? And so I would just say, hey, it's more important to be right with people than right. It's more important to be right with people than right. LaRon talked about forgiveness last week in his great message on honor and reconciliation. Forgiveness is hard but necessary, and our walk with God depends on it. If you are presenting a sacrifice, if you're worshiping at church and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you, leave your sacrifice there at the altar, go and be reconciled to that person. Then come and offer your sacrifice to God. So let's seek righteousness, not rightness. And if there's a reason you can't be reconciled, maybe the person's not around, you can at least choose forgiveness. Over and over, every day, if you have to, you can choose forgiveness if that's what it takes. And remember, unforgiveness always hurts us more. They say unforgiveness is like setting yourself on fire and hoping it'll burn the other person. It's you that gets hurt and burned by unforgiveness. It seems like too much time is gone. It's not worth it. Remember, it's 20 years since all this has happened. It's 20 years later they're reconciling this relationship. So listen, I'm just saying, for the sake of your walk with God, the sake of your family relationships, and the model that you show in your family, just do your best to reconcile the relationships. So let's get back in the story. So we see something else interesting happening. It's actually happening right now in the middle of this reconciliation moment, even before Jacob and Esau get together. Jacob enters the world's strangest wrestling match. So Jacob's all alone. He had sent his family over the river, and a man who we find out later is God came and wrestled with him until dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip, wrenched it out of its socket, left him with a limp. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" he asked. He replied, "I'm Jacob." He said, "No, your name's not going to be Jacob anymore. From now on, you will be called Israel because you have fought with God and with men and have won. And so I just want to say this. I'm going to ask you to fight. I'm going to ask you to fight for your faith. Isn't it interesting that God uses a wrestling match with Jacob? You know, Jacob's about to meet Esau. He doesn't know if he's going to get killed and plundered or what's going on in Esau's mind. And I'm sure what Jacob wanted right now was just some words of encouragement and affirmation. Everything's going to be okay, my son. But instead of this quick, comforting word from the Lord, he gets an all-night fight with God. And so I just want to say, sometimes when we're hoping and wanting God to speak or to move or to show up, sometimes he does it in very unplanned and unexpected and even unwanted ways. But he does it in ways that cause us to be strong and tenacious and determined. He does it in ways that cause us to, like the Bible says, to work out this salvation. He does it in ways that make us go through something instead of around something. He does it in ways that leave a mark, a scar, a limp, a lasting impression that, man, more than anything, we need Jesus. So, in the midst of our stuff, we can either pursue God, we can fight, or we can choose to walk away. But think about this. What if Jacob, during this all-night fight, had chosen to walk away before it was done? What would he have missed? The blessing, his new name, his new identity, his new high ground, his new future. God will not turn away from your dogged determination to seek him until you find him. Look at Hebrews. Hebrews 10, do not throw away, and don't throw this away, don't throw away your faith. Do not throw away your confident trust in the Lord. Remember the great reward it brings you. Patient endurance is what you need now so that you will continue to do God's will. Then you will receive all, then you will receive all that he's promised. I know, like Jacob, you may be in a place in your family in the midst of some unplanned junk where what you really hope for is just kind of words of comfort and assurance, and it's going to be okay. And I believe God will bless us with those. But it's hard, I know, in times I've had to think about taking ground, fighting, taking back what the enemy's stolen. But I'm asking, begging, pleading with you, do not give up. Wrestle this thing out. Fight in prayer when you don't hear a thing. Fight in his word when you don't feel like it. Walk out this fight with friends and small groups, with a counselor. Move the fight out of your family and your relationships and into the spiritual realm where the fight really is. That's where the battle really is. Think about this. The wrestling is happening between God and Jacob as he wrestles this thing out. And the restoration is happening between Jacob and Esau. Move it out of the family. Move the fight to where it belongs. So what is God trying to wrestle out of you, me, to get us to a place where we need to be, to do family better? Remember, the change God is after is in you, not the person next to you, not the other person in relationship. That's how Pastor Michael started this entire series. The change God is after is in you, not the person you can elbow. So what does he want you to wrestle out to get where you need to be to do family better? Well, let's start landing the plane a little bit and just get this on the board. Your dysfunction, detours, and difficulties, they don't define you. Your past, your messy, broken, unplanned present, it does not determine your finish or your future. Jacob is one of the Bible's most unlikely candidates to be used by God. The Bible's full of those. It's comforting to us in a way. But this is the deceiver. And yet we read later in Hebrews 11 when the author lists this long list of faith heroes of the Bible. Jacob is there. And look what he says about Jacob. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning upon the top of his staff. And I believe if we could zoom out in the life of Jacob and see the full context, we would see this young man who was stealing a blessing, becoming the old man who was giving the blessing. We'd see this young man wrestling with God and this old man who worshiped God. And I'm just saying, through all the dramatic and unplanned, messy events of Jacob's life, God had a plan. God had a future. And I think, man, if God can use him and God had a future for him, he can use you, and he's got a future for me. I want you to think about something. Many times in the Bible, we see God identified with this phrase, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God's covenant title to establish his people includes the name of Jacob, the con man, the trickster, the deceiver. He gets top billing in the covenant name with God. Remember when God appears to Moses in the burning bush? And Moses is like, whoa, what's this? And who are you? And he says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As if to say, I am the God that keeps my promises, and I'm going to keep a promise and a future with you. I'm about to use you too. And so I would say this, no matter how you got to where you are in your relationships, no matter what you've done, no matter what you've passed down, no matter what's been passed down to you, no matter what you've done up to this point to mess up your situation, your past does not define you. Because God's promise still stands. He is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Deanna and Bobby and Liz and William. He is the God, and your past does not define you. He's not left you. He's not forsaken you. The Bible says he can restore the years that the locust has eaten. He's still the God that works all things together for good. He has a future for you, and your past does not define it. Your past does not define it. Just let it sink in. But I know this, in speaking about this, I know there's unplanned and expected events that happen in our lives that really have nothing to do with us. We didn't cause it. We're just having to bear up under it because we live in a broken world full of broken people and sin, and there's just unfair stuff that happens. And I just want you to know God knows and God sees and God is there. I want to introduce you to the Freeman family. This is Scott and Michelle, their 3 daughters, Gabby, Macy, and Lexi. And when our family lived in Texas several years ago, they were our best friends. We lived 4 doors down from each other. Our kids, we were in each other's houses. Michelle was my wife Erica's best friend. We went to church together. Scott was a gifted singer. I was a worship pastor. He was on the worship team. It was just a real cool season of a special family friendship. But none of us could have planned what was coming next. On June 24th, 2002, our student ministry at the church was getting ready for youth camp. And so all the students met up at the church. They got on 2 big charter buses. We prayed over them, and they set out for what we expected to be a life-changing experience for them. And it was, just not quite what we were planning. 45 minutes into the trip, one of the chaperones would later tell us they were following behind one of the buses, and they saw one of the buses begin to drift a little. And then it began to drift some more. And finally, it drifted completely off the road at full speed into a concrete pillar holding up an overpass over I-20 interstate in East Texas. And I really don't have words. It was just an horrific accident. Many kids were severely injured, students with lifelong injuries. And 4 of those students lost their lives. And one of them was 12-year-old Michael Freeman. There are some things about that day that are a blur to me. And then there are things about that day that are just crystal clear. The panicked call from the church office, running 4 doors down, picking up Michelle, racing down country back roads to get to the site. Scott driving from work as fast as he could and jumping out of his car and running down the interstate to get to the scene. And I just remember standing on the edge of I-20 in Texas and thinking, what in the world? How do I make sense of this? Just grief-stricken and numb and all those things happening at the same time. Man, I remember that. I remember the drive to the county morgue. I remember the funeral. I remember all of that. Unplanned, to say the least. And so I haven't shared that publicly before, and I share this story with their permission because it's not mine to tell on my own. And so as I talked with Scott this week, I just said, man, it'll be almost 20 years in June since that's happened. And what have you learned? What did God teach you? What is God teaching you through one of the most terrible, unplanned events in life that you had no part in? And I said, what would you say if you were sitting here to us? I said, man, please write that down. And so he did. And he said, Michelle and I have said so many times that without hope, there is nothing. And there is no hope without God. Hope is the one thing you can't move forward without. When we see people now who are hopeless, it breaks our hearts because we know money can't buy hope. You can't earn it through working harder or achieving more. And hope is what fills the black hole in your heart so that darkness can't consume you. Hope allows you to trust God enough to let your second and third and fourth child get on a bus so they can enjoy the life God has for them instead of being crushed by fear. And then he added this verse, yes, my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from him. And so I want to offer this, no matter your situation today. It may be tragic, it may not be. Wherever you are in your unplanned life that you didn't see coming, I just want to offer you this. The one loss that no one can afford to experience is the loss of hope. Right. Yeah. The loss of hope. It's what we hold on to. And so we started out this message with those 6 words that maybe we all could relate to in some way or the other. Man, this is not, this family, this life, this is not quite what I was planning. I'm pretty sure nearly every character in Jacob's family would say, what in the world? None of this is craziness. None of this is what we planned or expected. And some of us, like I said, can all relate to that. But I want to invite you to rename your story today. Remember when Jacob was wrestling with God and God said, okay, you are no longer Jacob. Now this is who you're going to be. Now you're Israel. That no longer defines who you are. Now you have a new identity, a new future, a new destiny. I want us to rewrite. I want us to give our story a new name today. So instead of, man, how did I get here? Or not quite what I was planning. Let's name it these 6 words. I'm holding on to hope. Because hope is the only way we take a next step. It's the only way to break the family cycles, the only way to reconcile relationships, the only way to move ahead and turn the page and start a new chapter in our story, to move from, man, I didn't plan that, to what God can really do, to the future God could really call out in us and has. And listen, hope is not just some new life strategy. Hope is not a strategy. Hope is a person, Jesus. So I just want to remind you, as Jesus endured the pain and the shame of our sin on the cross, it's so we could have this relationship with him, with God, the author of this great hope. And so my prayer for you, if you haven't surrendered your life to Christ, if you haven't committed all of your life to him, the Bible calls it being born again. My prayer for you today is you will do that because he's the hope you're looking for. And if you feel stuck in a life that just seems unplanned and how did I get here, I just invite you to rename your story and you just decide, I'm gonna fight for this thing. I'm gonna hold on to hope. Let's pray. God, thank you for just the reminder of who you are. That you can take any situation, planned or unplanned, and give us a hope and a future. That's who you are. I pray for anyone who doesn't know you today as their Savior. I pray you would speak to them and they would find the hope they need in their life. And I pray for those of us who have got to a place we can't quite understand in our life. And instead of just getting stuck and wondering why we are here, we would look to you and realize that you are here. And we can hold on to hope and fight for our families and fight for our faith and wrestle this thing out. Thank you for the hope that we find in you. In Jesus' name. Amen.